Hey everyone, just wanted to cover a simple, well not so simple, topic tonight, which happens to be suffering, right? Where does suffering come from? And we're thinking about, when I talk about this, let's talk about the mind, for instance. Where does suffering in life come from? It comes from, to make it simple, two things. Those two things are attachment and desire, right? Our desires and our attachment to that creates suffering. Because one thing we know, if we're born in this body, that eventually we're going to die. And it could happen through something sudden, it could happen through something of illness, it could happen through old age, right? So we know as one of the first noble truths that suffering happens as long as you come into a body. So when we think of suffering also, when we think of our attachments to our desires, this creates suffering, especially when you don't get what you want, right? So when we apply this to relationships, right, we have this desire to be with this person. We have a desire to make this person happy. We have the desire for them to make us happy. And then when we start to notice that this starts to fall apart, we start to suffer, right? Why are we suffering? Because we have an attachment to these results that we've created in our head. And then, like, one thing for sure, you think of like a priest, a swami, a renunciant monk, a Buddhist monk. You know, why are they either celibate or why are they not in a relationship with another person? Of course, one person can say, oh, now they're married to God or the divine. But you have to think about it. As we all inhabit this body with our souls for a reason and a purpose on earth to learn something. We also come here with certain karma from the past that we've collected either in other lifetimes. We also have karma that we create in this present moment, and we have future karmas that we create now that will affect us in the future with our either good or poor decisions. This has to do just solely with us. When we have somebody else in our life, they have their karmas, right? So what they think, how they feel, how they interact, the stuff they have in their past, and that gets intertwined with us. So it always makes things more complicated, which is fine because it's a normal part of life. But when you think of somebody who's a renunciant or a monk or a priest, why, besides being, their goal is probably enlightenment, right? That's normally the goal. And for them to do all the work on their own to reach that place. And to be with another person is going to impede that, but that's not always the case, right? So if you take one person, say, out of your life, which is a relationship, then it should be easier for you to move on to these different planes and achieve that goal. But a lot of us are not celibate monks or priests or sadhus or anything like that. So now we look at people that are in relationships. Of course, you could be a religious person too, but you have your karma and they have theirs. You have your desires, they have theirs, right? And then when you're in a relationship, it starts to become something of you giving a little bit, bending a little bit to make things work, and that person does also, because everybody does that within a relationship. But then also you have your attachment to things, your attachment to what you want things to be like, your attachment to what you think the future will be like, your attachment to how you think that person should treat you. And then when things don't pan out, the suffering is right around the corner, because now you're not happy anymore, right? Because you have an attachment to these desires that are not being fulfilled. So, Buddhism could sound very like doom and gloom type of thing, where it's like, oh, the first noble truth is suffering. It's like, who wants to learn anything about that? But this is all about the human nature. the human mind. You have to think originally Buddhism, and it's really Eastern philosophy about life, where it's like it's all about the mind. It's taking the God aspect out of everything, okay? So and this has nothing to do with not believing at all, but it's like, okay, let's just focus on you. Let's focus on your mind. Let's focus on how you think, how you feel, how you interact with yourself and with others, what's your desires, what's your attachment to those desires. All these things are very important to start to look at, because this will show you how you either create suffering or relieve suffering. And another thing is also the radical acceptance of impermanence. What is that? Nothing in this world is permanent. You can say, well, I'm in this body for this amount of time. But look, as you get older, your hairline starts to recede. You could even go bald. Your hair color starts to change to either gray or silver or white, and then people will dye it, which is perfectly fine because people want to look good. But it's like, okay, what is that attachment to look a certain way, right? Well, I don't want to look older, so it's like I'm going to dye my hair because I'm not that old yet. I shouldn't have to look this way. So you have a certain attachment. But when you start to accept things for what they are, you start to relinquish your control over things. And when you start to loosen your grip on things and let things go, life becomes easier. Because over time we realize that we really don't have much control over anything outside of ourselves. And most of us don't have much control of ourselves, especially when you do suffer from some type of disorder, especially when it has to do either chemical or mental or a personality disorder. You don't really have much control over it. Even though you might be aware of it, you still don't have much control over it. So it all comes back to understanding, in this life there will be suffering, but what could help relieve the suffering? Understanding it, understanding what your desires are, and understanding your attachment to those. And the more you could start to understand it, the more you could start to let go and loosen your grip on it, because then you start to realize that you really don't have much control over things. And then also, there's an expression, God doesn't give you what you want, he gives you what you need. So if you think of this as a spiritual journey, you're going to get the lessons that you need along the way. You're going to have certain people cross your path that bring you joy and bring you suffering. The ones that bring you joy, you live in the moment and you appreciate it. The ones that bring you suffering, you take those and you learn from it. And then when that person leaves, you don't try to stay attached to them because that's going to bring more suffering. Because whatever your desires were or are, that might not be theirs anymore. Some people change like the wind blows, and understanding this will help make life easier. It doesn't mean that you won't feel anymore and you won't suffer anymore, because as long as you're alive, you will suffer. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's feelings, financial means, old age, disease, all these things are just part of life, and it's okay, because when we come to that realization, we could have a better understanding of it, and then we don't have to hold on so tightly. Because once you could understand life has suffering and there's impermanence mixed in there, there's a better understanding of things. So, when we look at what our desires are and our attachment to it, we could start to understand things if we look at it in a real way, where we could say, okay, this is what I want, but it might not be what I get, and it might not be something that I'm able to get now, or if it has to do with another person, maybe I will never get it. And understanding that is okay, because once you understand that, you can let go. And as you let go of it, you could bring more joy into your life. A good thing you could think of, an example is if you ever see those old cowboy movies where somebody's holding on to a rope that's attached to a horse and the horse is getting away. And the guy's getting dragged down, the street or whatever you want to call it. And it's like, wow, the longer he holds on to that rope, the more he's going to suffer. So if you think of that rope as attachment, the longer he holds on, he's going to suffer. What's his desire? To stop the horse, right? So if he realizes the longer I hold on to this rope, the further I'm going to be dragged, the more I'm going to suffer. And the suffering comes from my desire and attachment. So if I can let go of it and understand that there's no such thing as anything being permanent, life will be easier. Of course, you could be dragged a little bit, but you let go early, you have a few bumps and bruises, but now you can move on from it. And then once you start to move on from that, there's other levels, of course, of understanding, and then finding a place of peace and stability and stillness and happiness that becomes something that is something you could actually maintain and cultivate on a regular basis. Of course, there's gonna always be curveballs thrown at you, but understanding this concept of desire and attachment is very important, because this will help lessen the karmic load and lessen your suffering. And then from there, we'll talk about other things in the future that are definitely helpful and useful. So hopefully this gave you a little bit insight on something different. And I know I'll be making more videos in the future because I'm feeling a little more comfortable, because in the beginning I was definitely super camera shy. So thank you everybody for listening. Hope some of this information is helpful and useful, and we'll keep chatting, because my whole goal is just to put stuff out there that is useful and that could help people. All right, thank you very much. Have a good night.